All right, we continue now with discussions around the ANC's policy conference, which kicks off at Newzroom today and throughout the weekend. Corruption remaining a challenge in government, but according to the policy documents at least, there have been efforts made to combat the scourge. The document talks about positive developments that have been seen in the form of the State Capture Commission, investigations by the Hawks and the SIU, and so on. But let's get you more insight on what needs to change from a policy perspective to help alleviate systemic corruption. Public Procurement Scholar with Stellenbosch Academy, Songezo Mabece, joins us via our video link this morning. Songezo, it's great to talk to you. And in fact, I'm on page 118 of the ANC's policy document because that's where it talks about the fight against corruption, right? And there are big statements made about the governing party and its stance on corruption. There's one line here where it says the ANC must ensure that whoever dares to try their hand at corruption and crime must pay. I'm reading verbatim here from page 118 of the policy document. That's a broad statement, but if we take it on face value, it's not a statement that's been implemented at party level.
Good morning, Michelle. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and I extend greetings to your listeners and viewers, shall I say.
Thank you.
There's nothing in that policy statement that you are reading for the first time. It's not anything you would not have heard for the first time over a protracted period of time, one would even suggest. It really does boil down to a political commitment to ensure that anything that is in line with building a state, a capable state, where all parties politically, where all parties socially, where even business community get an overwhelming sense that the country has a zero tolerance to corruption. I'm afraid that policy statement does not address one bit of it unless and until we see the evidence behind this sweet talk.
Well, shall we read more from this policy document? Because this will be the guiding light for the discussions that unfold over the weekend, right? It talks about the ANC being like a fully grown tree. If the worms are eating the tree and are not treated, it will wither away. I take it the worms are the scourge of corruption. It talks about a trust deficit as well with the electorate because of, quote, our perceived inability to deal decisively and cure the cancer that has eroded our moral and ethical leadership role. Again...
Well, let's talk about the ANC, because 2022 is the year of renewal and unity to defend and advance South Africa's democratic gains. And that's what it has committed itself to for itself. The very same ANC cannot pay salaries of its members. The president has seen his finest hour come and gone because now he is embroiled in the sorts of scandals and narratives around him and his office that are not becoming of an ANC leader, not becoming certainly of a head of state. This step-aside policy that was, I would imagine, implemented 5 years ago from the previous conference, it has absolutely been met with all manner of resistance from within. KZN now, the latest party following the elective conference, who want to scrap this. Why would a party that wants to be seen, as per this page 118 of the Mkhabulo document, be seen to be wanting to fight corruption, and yet the very mechanism that they implemented, that they wanted us as a nation to receive 5 years ago, in saying if you are in any way seen to be associated with corruption, in the meantime step aside. This is not a guilty finding, it's simply a moment for you to engage the law enforcement agencies against the perception of your corruption. Now they want to get rid of it. This is not a step in the right direction. If anything, it's a step in the wrong direction. So the metaphor that on their own account they use about a tree being eaten from within is the perfect metaphor on present facts in terms of what is going on within the ANC. The factional battles of the ANC are the very reason why the ANC, at the last time out, 2021 local government elections, came back with a lesser mandate from the public. The trust deficit more and more is going. The ANC from within cannot stand as a house, for it is divided. And that's because the culture that is become endemic in our society, best represented by what's happening in the party, the ANC, has become so entrenched. So we absolutely do need agencies and social partners to come involved more and more now, not for rhetoric, but for action. And that's exactly what the Pavocat Stellenbosch Academy probably has placed in our society.
Well, I want to talk to you more about what the ANC says about the positive steps that have been made towards addressing corruption in the country. But let's talk more about the step-aside resolution and what you've just talked about there, Songezo. The issue of, if I am tainted in any way, I should step aside. The argument for those who are against the step-aside rule is that it's not implemented in the same way against all members of the party, no matter who you are, no matter where you fall in the leadership structure. Another argument is that it's not legally sound. If I don't have charges leveled against me, should I be stepping aside? Where in that argument does the issue of the ethics of stepping aside come in?
Justice must not just be done, but must be seen to be done. Caesar's wife must be above reproach and above suspicion. That's the response to your final point in relation to ethics. Yes, there's a constitutional injunction of the presumption of innocence until proven guilty. There's absolutely nothing wrong with the reverse onus in the context of an ethical society, in the context of a society that has got the challenges that it has in trying to fight corruption the way we need it to be fought, to reverse, at a bare minimum, the onus to prove that indeed you are above reproach, that justice is not just being done but be seen to be done, in simply suggesting there's just far too many allegations against your name. Tell us what is going on. And in the process of doing that, surely you cannot be presiding over state resources. You cannot be the face of a government or of a people who need corruption to be bust from its very core. Unfortunately, the step-aside rule has not really been fairly and categorically implemented, and that's the only people who can be blamed for that is the ANC government itself. We as a nation are baying for evidence to come across in the way of convictions, criminal convictions. There's absolutely scope for the NPA and other law enforcement agencies to come across in that regard. And unfortunately, society, there's a disparate view that whatever is being said, whatever the laws and the regulations suggest is being done, there isn't enough evidence that is going to create a culture and awareness that builds on the narrative that South Africa is fighting crime. For instance, in 2020, that very document refers to the fact that the Corruption Perception Index, South Africa ranked 69 out of some 180 countries. It goes on to say this is a slight improvement from the previous year. And then would you believe they say we must maintain this momentum? How do you maintain a slight improvement in the fight against corruption when its impact is as devastating as it is, when our returns against our rand spent for social services do not equate and do not amount to what we should expect in the result? You do not need and must not retain that momentum.
Yeah.
You should absolutely be, you should do what it takes to really ramp it up and be seen totally to be committed in countering corruption.
Yeah. And your frustration is felt, particularly this week. I mean, the ANC throughout this document talks about its quote-unquote tough stance on corruption. Of course, in real time, in real life, that's very different. The issue of Babita Deokaran comes to mind, the whistleblower in the Gauteng Health Department, who was killed, we now know, because of that News 24 expose, just weeks after she flagged several irregular payments from Tembisa Hospital to one individual. She flags that with the head of finance in the Gauteng Health Department. Those WhatsApp messages between her and the head of finance has now come to light as well. And she is told in no uncertain terms to go ahead and make those irregular payments and let's keep it between us. After what unfolded with this woman's murder, she was ripped from her family, essentially, according to all of this prima facie evidence that is before us, for trying to get to the bottom of corruption. That happened last year. What's unfolded since then in Gauteng Health?
Well, truth has permanent enemies. It is never going to be popular. And in the context of Babita, may her soul rest in peace, that's the sort of public servant we want in this country. But essentially, you are touching on the whistleblower protections in this country and the fact that we are a long way off from the global standard in a way as to incentivize whistleblowers to come through with the truth and to consequently be protected so that we can try and get to the bottom of this. Babita is the name that came to the news headlines. There are many who are victimized in the workplace, or many worse who are killed, but simply might not be known simply because the very reason it's not in the nature of us to find out. It's in the interest of all these persons who are trying to get rid of these corruption busters for them not to be found out. So unfortunately, Babita may not necessarily be the last one to sacrifice her life in the fight against corruption if the status quo is anything to go about it. I mean, the SIU report earlier this year confirming these are the errant and delinquent providers of services to the government, both at entity and individual level. How many of those who should be debarred from going further in business with the state have actually been debarred? Very few, if any. That is part of the problem. Implementing decisions that ought to be implemented and running an account and a database where the country can keep tabs with the perceptions of corruption and the implementation of corruption. Unfortunately, we don't have a coordinated approach and plan in that regard. And that's why we continue to see these things happen the way that they do. And for us, me and you, to be talking as we are. We're not talking about concrete stuff here. We're still trying to get the ball rolling, aren't we? Yeah,
absolutely. And that's the fear, isn't it, Songezo, that this will be another talk shop the next 3 days. I mean, there's another line here that talks about enforcing organizational discipline across all levels. It says many ANC members are good. This is a quote. Many ANC members are good, but some are still prone to misconduct and corruption.
Anybody in government is prone to that. It's not just an ANC thing. Unfortunately, the ANC are the governing party, so uneasy lies the head that wears the crown. But however one might want to look at this, South Africa is at the precipice of something big and definitive for all of time in the next 2 to 3 years. One, because the ANC has been the only party who has led our democracy. They need to come to the party first. And what happens between now and the end of the year with its elective conference and which way they decide to go, and we can draw inferences from there, what will happen in 2024 at the national general election, that is going to be definitive. Just as much, and the popular perception that is being held now is that the ANC will not return with majority government, that squarely brings into play the value of coalition governments. They have not proven in the very short time, albeit proven successful in the country. So we've got 2 to 3 years to think long and hard as a society what we want. Our leaders absolutely will have to lead us in that regard, but I think equally ourselves, civil society, has to adopt a different approach. We are the first guards of our democracy. We are the first law enforcement agencies that help the NPA, the SIU, and other institutions of government in the fight against crime. And I think now the next 2 to 3 years are not just of the ruling party or of government officials, but you and I, Michelle, have a responsibility to play, and dare we not fail.
Yeah, certainly. Dare we not fail. Songezo Mabece, thanks so much for weighing in on an incredibly important discussion, and the issue of corruption, no doubt, high up on the agenda in the minds of South Africans, certainly heading into this policy conference. Songezo Mabece is a public procurement scholar at Stellenbosch University. Thanks very much indeed for joining us.